Hey guys, my name is Dice Rollin, and today we're going to be delving into a film based from the novel that disturbed its own creator. A terrifying classic, not just for Stephen King fans. Pet Sematary was directed by Mary Lambert and released on April 21st, 1989. Ever since, it's been chilling audiences to the bone. So without further ado, this is my review of Pet Sematary. The movie opens with a bit of a tour of the pet cemetery as the voices of children recite the epitaphs of pets buried there. At the same time, the Creed family arrives at their new home. This is Lewis and Rachel, played by Dale Midkiff and Denise Crosby respectively. Ellie, played by Blaise Berdal, suffers a mild injury while playing on a tire swing. This distracts both parents so they don't notice Gage, played by Miko Hughes, almost getting run over by a truck. Thankfully, their neighbor Judd Crandall, played by the late Fred Gwynn, stops him. Later that night, while everyone else is in bed, Lewis goes over to Judd's house for a beer and some eerie exposition. According to Judd, the path they noticed earlier leads to a literal pet cemetery that exists because of the Orinco trucks killing the local pets. This isn't very optimistic news for Lewis, given that Ellie has a cat named Church. The next day, we're introduced to another character, the Creed's housekeeper, Missy Dandridge, played by Susan Blommaert, who suffers from stomach pains and a case of pessimism. Judd takes the family down the path to visit the pet cemetery, and Rachel isn't exactly thrilled about it. The situation isn't made any better when Ellie questions the concept of Church's own death because of the pet cemetery. So, Lewis takes Church to get, as Missy puts it,
nuts cut, yes.
Fuck you! I'm still more important in this story than you!
And goes to his first and most traumatic day at work at the university. Here we're introduced to Victor Pascal, played by Brad Greenquist, who promptly dies because he was hit by a truck. Victor tells Lewis that he'll be back, and he appears that night in the Creed house. Unlike with most specters of a less than pleasant appearance, Victor is trying to help Lewis. And if it's one thing I've learned from horror movies, it's if a mutilated ghost shows up in your house and tells you to follow them, you better fucking follow him, because this is important. Victor leads Lewis to the pet cemetery and tells him that under no circumstances should he cross the barrier at the edge of the cemetery. Lewis wakes up to find that according to his muddy feet, this whole thing was in fact real. We jump to about Thanksgiving time, where Rachel, Ellie, and Gage are leaving to visit Rachel's parents. Lewis stays behind, for the same reason anyone would at the premise of visiting their in-laws. Unfortunately for him, Judd finds a dead cat on his lawn that turns out to be Church. Good to know that neutering the cat meant jack shit. Judd has a solution though, which involves going to a place beyond the barrier that Lewis was specifically told not to cross. Hey, listen, there's a much easier way to do this. You need a Ouija board, the Book of the Dead, and maybe, some goat's blood. You'll bring the cat back, anger some spirits, and still doom everybody, but in a much more efficient way. Judd takes Lewis on quite a long trek up to the Micmac burial ground, where Lewis buries Church. Once they return from doing this, Judd tells Lewis that he can't mention this little activity to his family when he calls them. The next day, Lewis finds out why Judd insisted that Church be buried in the Micmac burial ground. Judd tells him that what's buried there comes back, just like his dog Spot did when he was a kid. However, whatever's buried there doesn't seem quite right when it returns. When Rachel, Ellie, and Gage return, Ellie mentions that she had a nightmare about the events that we just saw. That would make Ellie the classic Stephen King trope of the psychic of the story. Elsewhere, we learn that Missy's stomach pain that she's been dealing with is cancer, so she ends up taking her own life in the form of hanging herself. On the bright side, we get a cameo from Stephen King as the priest at Missy's funeral. That night, Rachel gives some insight into why she hates the subject of death. Her older sister, Zelda, played by Andrew Hubbatsek, had spinal meningitis and died from it. Rachel harbors a lot of guilt because she was left in her care when she died, and Zelda's death was more of a relief than anything for her. The next day, the family and Judd have a nice picnic, but it doesn't last long when Gage gets away from Lewis, chasing after a kite, and with poor timing gets hit by a truck on the road. Afterwards, we're given a brawl at the funeral between Rachel's father and Lewis because he blames Lewis for all of this. These scenes are done very well because they are so gut-wrenching. Even more so if you have a child, given that the concept of losing them is unfathomable. Shit, I don't even have kids and I had to take a moment to watch some cat videos. Wait. Judd visits Lewis and tells him not to do what he's thinking about doing, because another father had buried his son in the Micmac burial ground. That didn't go so great, since when the son returned, he wasn't the same. So the men of the town set their house on fire, killing the son and father. Shortly after, Rachel and Ellie leave with Rachel's parents to Chicago, while once again, Lewis stays behind. In the remainder of his family's absence, Lewis digs Gage up, despite Judd and Victor's warnings, to rebury him at the burial grounds. At the same time, Ellie has a nightmare involving Lewis, Gage, and Victor, since Victor is trying to warn her and Rachel about the mistake Lewis is about to make. Rachel calls Judd since she can't get a hold of Lewis, and tells him that she's coming back. She has a nightmare on the flight back in which Zelda tells her that she and Gage are coming to get her, and subsequently gives the rest of us nightmares. The whole trip back, Victor is there with her, helping her get back as swiftly as possible. Meanwhile, Lewis carries Gage back up to the burial grounds and buries him. Again, this works, of course, and Gage returns to the Creed house. But this isn't the cute little tyke from before. Gage takes his father's scalpel and goes to Judd's house to play hide and seek. This is one game you don't want to win.
You wanna know how I got these scars?
Rachel arrives just in time to be lured into Judd's house and tormented by Zelda before Gage attacks her. Lewis wakes up the next morning finding evidence of his son's return and his scalpel missing. He also learns through a phone call from her father that Rachel was supposed to arrive. This is when Lewis realizes that resurrecting his son might not have been such a great idea. A creepy fucking call from Gage proves this notion, so he goes to Judd's house and euthanizes Church. Going inside, Lewis finds that Judd's house has a serious mold problem. Not only that, but both Judd and his wife are dead. Now he has to fight off his rabid undead toddler before managing to euthanize him too. And just to make damn sure, he lights the whole house on fire. However, he does take Rachel's body with him, and given that at this point he's gone off the deep end, even Victor can't reason with him. So he buries her in the Micmac burial grounds and she returns, a little worse for wears. And we're given the very strong impression that she stabs Lewis. And the credits roll with Pet Sematary by the Ramones. Now let us discuss this piece. The scoring and soundtrack for Pet Sematary is haunting. There are parts of it that depict the deep sadness of the characters. These are key elements to the story. Elliot Goldenthal had mainly utilized string instruments and pianos for the score, including a child's toy piano for another level of creepiness. There are some Ramones songs sprinkled in with the iconic Pet Sematary, which was written specifically for this film. One of my favorite horror/Halloween songs, by the way. The practical effects are pretty solid in their otherworldly and gruesome fashion. Everything that's dead actually looks realistically like it's dead. The special effects are they're a product of the 80s technology and techniques. But even so, it's all pulled off well. I especially like Victor Pascal and Undead Rachel's looks. The only thing that fell almost a little flat was Gage's makeup, but I'm not holding that against anyone. They were working with a little kid and couldn't get a cast of his head. Overall, these are zombies, but they don't come across like the typical Hollywood zombies that we're used to, and that's hard to do, especially in the 80s. All the actors did good in their roles. Fred Gwynne was a delight as always. Dale Midkiff came off kinda stiff, but did a good job of portraying a logical man's descent into sheer insanity and grief. Denise Crosby was able to portray Rachel with a depth and a grounded fear to the chaotic events. Miko, for a toddler, did very well as the adorable kid in the first half, and the sinister murdering shit in the latter. Brad Greenquist made Victor stand out and act as the sympathetic yet eerie ghost guide. All the side characters were fleshed out well enough, and important to the tone and the plot. Shout out to Andrew Habatsek for being able to not only emote through all of that makeup, but make Zelda even more terrifying than she already was. Talking about the plot of the film, I want to point out that this is one of the very few horror movies that I have seen thus far that has genuinely unsettled me. Other movies have been creepy and entertaining and all that, but Pet Sematary has conveyed a certain level of eerie and disturbing that I haven't gotten from other movies of the horror genre. It centers around one of the ultimate fears of most people, which is death. More specifically, the death of loved ones. It would be extremely hard to talk about the story without referencing Stephen King's book, but that's for a different video. For now, I'll say that Mary Lambert did excellent work in bringing what was on the page to the screen in the best way that she could. It all follows the same path, pun intended, that the book did, with some expected exceptions and changes. So, leave a comment down below telling me what your thoughts are on this version of Pet Sematary. And if you have any suggestions for horror movies you would like to see me review in the future. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like to let me know. Also, don't forget to share this video to help the channel grow, and subscribe for more videos, more reviews like this. See you later.
The soil of a man's heart is stonier, Lewis. Man grows what he can, and he tends it.